Hey everyone, this is Josh Jackson from 6 Clicks, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I am your host, as always, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 226 for June 28th, 2021. Now, quick note, I don't often do it this way. I usually record the intros and outros to the podcast like the weekend before. So if there's any hot topics, I can make sure I try to address those so they're fresh and ready on Monday's show. But I actually recorded this a week ago. So if there's any crazy cybersecurity or privacy story in the news right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Kerry didn't mention it, that's why. I had to record it early because I had a little vacation, and by the time this drops, I will actually be back, but will not have had time to have done this before I get back, so anyway, just FYI. This week, we got a second interview from a different person. We had a really fun time last week talking to Jason Williams and Carl Rodeo about their Hackaset program, and today we're going to talk with yet another cybersecurity expert named Josh Jackson. He's from a company called 6Clicks, and today we're just going to kind of do a review of the current, unfortunately, sad state of cybersecurity right now, and, what we're going to do to make things better. He and his company are out there on the front lines making things better for companies that employ them, and so he was a good person to talk to about this. And, are things getting better? Are things getting worse? Why can't we seem to keep the bad guys out? His company in particular is using artificial intelligence, so I'm definitely going to be asking him how that plays in all this, how it can help us do better at defending against cyber attacks. But also, is this just something that the bad guys are also going to use against us? Now, real quick, this is the last week. June is almost over. The promotion to get your D20 challenge coin by becoming a patron, that time is just about up. If you catch this when this drops on Monday, Wednesday is the end of the month, so you only have 3 days, really 2, to get that challenge coin. Now, I have not had enough new patrons to use up all the coins that I minted, so there's still some around, and I will find some other creative ways to get them out to fans and possibly patrons again in the future, but I'm not sure when, not sure how. So if you want to lock one of those puppies in and get one in your hot little hands, now is the time. Go to patreon.com, search up Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, and you'll find the info there. And there's actually a link in the show notes, of course. You can click directly on that to get info that way. These things are really cool. I'm really glad I did these. It's been a lot of fun. Brought in some great new patrons too. Loving talking with everybody on Discord. The community is just getting bigger, and you could be a part of it. Alrighty, now let's get to our interview with Josh Jackson. Josh Jackson is an avid student of law, policy, and regulations. He's a speaker on artificial intelligence and automation, and a teacher on the legal and regulatory environment of business. He is passionate about ethics and agency law and corporate and regulatory risk. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Kerry. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here because we haven't had you on the show before, and you've got a really interesting background. So actually, let's start there. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, like how you got into cybersecurity, maybe what kind of things you've worked on, and what are you working on right now?
I mean, I think life is always a ever-changing sort of thing. And at the very beginning, so I was a chemist by trade.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I did chemistry for a long time, and regulations were a part of the piece in terms of businesses and how they think about drug development and the like. And then, kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I really focused in on shifting from the basic science, to how do we think about healthcare law. Went to Emory Law for healthcare law, really focused on that. And at the same time, did some lobbying around healthcare law. During that process, I was really getting into emerging technologies and how artificial intelligence works and what are the regulatory environments around it. And as I'm thinking about those pieces of emerging technology, the sector that really needed some help was the cybersecurity. And is there a way that you can keep up with some of these information security, cybersecurity issues and risks, and use artificial intelligence as a tool to mitigate those risks, plug some of these issues, and and be more efficient and effective, because all the bad actors are using any and every tool that they can.
Absolutely.
And they might be under some sort of, right, if you're doing something illegal, obviously that's breaking the law and it's breaking regulation, but they're not really interested in all of that. So
Right.
from a business side and an ethical side, folks not only need to be compliant with the regulations, but they also need to thwart off, like find a way to get rid of these risks. And so the only way you're going to be able to do it is through automation. And so that's kind of how I got into it. Was it's very few people are using automation and artificial intelligence, and definitely at the time, to think about regulatory risks and think about cyber threats.
Gotcha. Let's start out with a basic question at the high level. Like what is the state of cybersecurity today? Like, in your opinion, are things getting worse? Are they getting better? And like, what do you feel like probably the most impactful threats right now? And when I say impactful, there's a lot of stuff that gets big headlines, and then there's things that actually matters to most people. Like, at the end of the day, what are the things that are happening right now that you think are probably the most dangerous?
So the first part, I would say it's definitely getting worse. And I hate to be that person.
Not surprised to hear you say it, but it's good to hear it from another expert.
Yeah, I think it's getting worse. And really, the pandemic, we focused a lot on, is it because people were working remotely? Is that when it happened? But it happened well before that. We saw a lot more threats and a lot more data breaches. So technology is getting smarter, and with human beings being creatures of habit, we don't like to change as much. And there's been this vulnerability in our systems and how our government thinks about cybersecurity. And it's just going to continue to get worse until government takes it seriously, and businesses take these almost like that shield approach. Like cybersecurity is a shield, information security is a shield, and we tend to be very offensive driven with a business. How do I drive my business forward rather than how do I protect my business? I think that's the direction we need to go, is being on the defensive and then developing tools to be offensive in how we think about cybersecurity.
So what do you think what are the biggest threats right today?
Obviously, the biggest threat right now is the data. Since data is what people are calling the new oil, right? Then people are going to want to steal that data to turn it into monetary gain. And that comes in the form of, ransomware is obviously something that everyone is attached to. But at the end, it's the data that's the most valuable. So even if you lose that data, they have someone that's going to want to buy it.
Right. Yeah, and certainly we're going to talk about ransomware today. But again, staying at the high level, why is it that we cannot seem to stop these attacks? We've got a lot of really smart people out there, like yourself included. There's, these companies, maybe you can make some excuses for the smaller companies that don't have a full-fledged ID department, or certainly don't have a full-fledged, maybe a cybersecurity department. But a lot of these companies that are getting hacked are big-name companies with, deep pockets. So, why is it that we can't seem to stop these attacks? Is it a technical failure? Are we just failing to create secure systems? Or is it a people failure? And are we the weakest link? Is it social engineering or misconfigured systems, or is it probably some combination of both?
I think it's definitely a people problem. And I like to, I don't know if you like analogies on this.
Oh, I love analogies.
So if you have 2 or 3 people that are really smart and they have everything put together, let's just say 5 people. We'll call that a basketball team, right?
Okay.
They're all really good at basketball. They do really well at their job. It's going to be easy to fix and correct some minor flaws between another one of your teammates within basketball. If you take something like soccer, if one person makes a minor mistake and they give the ball to the other team, then it doesn't matter if you have 5 great players, 10 great players. You're as strong as your weakest player in soccer. And so with these large organizations, you have members that have access to the network very easily, and they wait. They're behind the shadows, right? And they say, okay, this is our weak link. How do we get access to them? And can they give us access to someone else? And then once they sit and wait, then the information comes that they need to access the entire system. It's game over.
Okay, so play that analogy out in a real world scenario. Like, how did that method give rise to an attack that maybe you could explain?
Yeah. Okay. So this is perfect. I was thinking about a company, a student that needed software to do data analytics. And he was a part of a university system. And they had universities have a ton of intellectual property, right? He couldn't afford the software, and the organization would not pay for the software. So what does he do? He goes to find free software online. So he purchases the software with his information, and it's what they call, I guess, cracked software.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And so now he's basically given access to whoever's on the other end. Right. And he's saying in chat rooms, hey, I can't afford this. Does anybody have an alternative to this? This is where I work, all these pieces of the puzzle. And they get in, lock up the system, pull all the data.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So for maybe those in the audience who aren't aware, so when you're doing software cracks, a lot of times these software, like big packages, like the Adobe packages and Microsoft, and some of these come with license keys, and so a lot of people, when they can't afford it, they go to shadier parts of the internet to try to find cracked software and get a license key that will work, or a version of the software that will work with a null key or something like that, which is like what you're talking about. And invariably, those the people that are smart enough to figure out how to do that to Microsoft Office or Adobe Lightroom or whatever are also smart enough to lace that with malware. And yeah, so it doesn't surprise me at all that that is a common example.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of specific ones. So the SolarWinds supply chain hack. This was surely one of the most consequential attacks in modern history. But can you explain to us the concept of a supply chain attack, and then maybe give us an overview of what happened in this particular case?
Yeah. So in terms of supply chain, this goes back to the weakest link. And in terms of your supply chain and your vendors, if your system is recognizing this vendor as a trusted source, then a lot of times I could say, well, hey, Carrie, I'm one of your vendors. I'm going to talk to X, Y, and Z at your company. And they're going to go, oh yeah, I'm a vendor of so-and-so. And they let you in. Right. I think this is what happens quite a bit, is we see with these large organizations, and especially with government, that the sources and vendors have been vetted to a particular degree, but everyone's not trusted. And so those vendors come along and someone masks what that vendor looks like, and the appropriate controls are not in place to meet some of these red flags. Like I said earlier, the folks tend to linger around and wait and hold on just long enough that when the information that comes through, it's almost like someone's listening, right? And they're just listening and waiting for the right information to come across the sound waves to then be able to penetrate the most vulnerable piece to get into the larger part. And that's how I see the SolarWinds make of an effect, right? Is that they had access to the system, and this system was trusted by everybody in the government.
Yeah, it affected a lot of people. I mean, I forget what the last count was I heard, but it was amazing and how many other different companies were using the SolarWinds software in their system. In my head, it's kind of like, okay, if I want to poison everybody in town, and I want to, let's say I want to put poison on all the bread. Well, instead of going to each bread maker, I just go to where they all get their flour. Maybe there's one guy in town they all buy flour from, and I poison the flour. And so now I don't have to go to each individual baker. They're all using the same flour. And then all of a sudden I've gotten to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to see, right, in that flour.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's really clever. And yeah, I have a feeling we're going to see more of that, especially with, it seems like, I don't know, there's so much consolidation in corporations and certain key elements in our various pipelines. They all seem to have choke points. Like we're all finding out now with chip shortages, right? I mean, it wasn't, well, maybe now is not a good example because it's kind of affecting everybody. But like when there was a fire at a chip plant in China at one point, it impacted a lot of other people because we all of a sudden realized, oh, there's only like 3 chip plants, on the planet. And when one of them goes down, we all feel it. And yeah, so. Okay. Well, it's been a little while since that story broke. At this point, do we have a handle on the full impacts or the ramifications of that incident? Because in my mind, when this came out, I was thinking, oh man, we're going to be dealing with this one for months, if not years. Do we even have a handle really on, like, do we have our arms around what really the impacts were of SolarWinds, or are we still trying to dig out from underneath that?
Yeah, and maybe I'm not the perfect one for all of this, but from what I understand and what I'm privy to, that this is still something that we're having to deal with. Who knows where everything was penetrated?
Yeah.
So I think it's just a constant trying to correct the issue and move forward. Because again, who's lurking behind the shadows and where are they sitting as things continue to be more and more complex? And the amount of IT infrastructure that's currently in place, it continues to increase in complexity.
Yeah.
And it varies across agency environments that SolarWinds took place, right? So
Right.
I think that's going to continue to be an issue, and hopefully we can make waves and move through some of these issues. And I think that's where the executive order from President Biden kind of puts some of these things into place to give everybody notice across all agencies.
I think the thing that scares me the most about things like this, and we're going to talk about this with this next case that I'm going to bring up too, and that is when there's these broad vulnerabilities that are left open for long enough. It's not the initial attack the initial attack is straightforward. It's what do they leave behind, right? I mean, so they get in, and then they can move from there, from the infected machine to other machines. And then they're not only exploiting the initial vulnerability, but they're perhaps exploiting other ones that are within your network and leaving behind other malware. And then you not only have to fix the first flaw, you got to figure out what else they exploited after they exploited the first flaw. And so that's why I really think that this is going to be, who knows? I mean, short of like throwing out all the computer systems that may have been attached and starting over, I don't know, what do you do? All right, so let's move on to another one that is different, but also extremely powerful and broad scope, and that is the Microsoft Exchange server attacks, which happened after SolarWinds, but only a couple months ago, or maybe just a month ago now. And if for those who aren't aware, Microsoft Exchange is the email server used by like every major company on the planet. Any company of any major size pretty much leans on Microsoft Exchange to run their email system. So it's everywhere. In your mind, how does that compare? Compare and contrast that with the SolarWinds attack. Like, how are they the same? How might they be different?
I don't think it was the new sort of say Office 365, which was all cloud based.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have something on-prem or in that sort of hybrid scenario, you potentially aren't updating it all the time and keeping it up to date. And that's typical of a lot of organizations where they don't update their security and understand these are the vulnerabilities, so let's update it let's patch this immediately. So can you find a flaw where there's not an update to that system and then be able to quickly jump in and collect as much information as possible?
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting point, and I think it kind of cuts both ways. In one sense, you're either taking it upon yourself to manage your own software or letting someone else do it, and obviously that could go bad either way. I mean, I guess if you're leaning on Microsoft, you're hoping that they're going to keep all their own stuff up to date. You can assume they would, but yeah, you're right. In this case, if it's an on-prem, if it's old software that has vulnerabilities that people aren't getting updated, and this was actually a big problem with these Microsoft things is they like missed a patch Tuesday. They like to do it every month, right? And they missed a patch Tuesday, and for some reason waited. But at that point, it had leaked, and the bad guys figured it out and started hammering on it. And Microsoft didn't get it out in time, and there were some Microsoft problems there too. And then after the fact, there were a lot of people still weren't updating because there's mom and pop, or smaller and medium businesses out there that just don't have the time or resources to update all their systems all the time. And I mean, the FBI and Microsoft in some cases, I think, didn't they take that into their own hands? Didn't they actually push out? I think the Microsoft one is where the government actually, or the FBI actually kind of hacked the vulnerable computers and fixed them. Wasn't that the case? Didn't they try to push out an update that way? Yeah.
And they didn't tell all the users.
Right.
Right. So they used legal instruments to basically say, like, hey, we're not going to let people know that we're doing this so that we can fix the issues.
Right.
So what was it, March? So this was just March, because I'm looking at it right now, is that Microsoft, people were taking advantage of the unpatched systems to attack organizations with on-premise Exchange servers.
Yeah, okay. Right.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
There's confirmation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that make sense that those would be the ones that would be lagging in terms of getting updated. One of the things that's really difficult in a lot of these cases, and our intelligence agencies and law enforcement, FBI and whatever, try to do the best they can, but attribution for these things is always difficult. Trying to figure out really who did it, because it's in the digital realm, if you're really smart, you can make it look like someone else did it. You can at least hide the fact that you did it. Why is attribution so difficult, and how confident can't we be that when we hear it on the news that, this is blamed on Russia, or this is blamed on North Korea, how confident can we be that that assessment was accurate?
Yeah, I don't think you can be confident in terms of looking at the news and what they're talking about in terms of who's to blame. Unfortunately, I personally think anyone that's not a part of the government and they're in a different world, it's going to be super hard to hold them accountable to something in the US. And I think likewise, if you're in the US and you're in another country, whatever it might be, the US is always trying to protect its citizens. And even more so, I think some of our adversaries, though they aren't responsible, I think they're going to be very reluctant to give up one of their citizens to the United States.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right. And so these multiple actors being able to attribute to them is always going to be difficult. And even if you can attribute it to someone, I think that's the more interesting. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to hold them to the laws of the United States in a different country?
Yeah, that is tricky. I mean, what do in the cases we've come up with, our law enforcement has come out and said, well, we're pretty sure that Russia did it. And I think in this latest one, they were saying that it was not necessarily directly sanctioned by Putin, but it's one of those things where it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Putin likes to have hackers in his country hacking other countries, as long as you're not hacking Russia. And every once in a while, as part of that, letting that slide, he'll come and ask you for favors. So it does make it tough. And you're right. So then what do you do? It seems to me that we really need to be focused on defense first, because offense is sometimes not even practical.
Yeah. I mean, it's the dance, right? We have to think about this a lot like a dance within our own organizations. Is what can we do now? And this goes back to training our workforce and education development within our organization to try and help everyone in the organization identify some of these risks and issues remediate whatever issues are there, and then defend against those attacks.
You mentioned ransomware, and it has certainly grown significantly. I think in the last few years, and it seems to be all over the news in this past year, including the Colonial Pipeline shutdown, which we'll talk about in a second. But how is it that let's just talk real quick. How does ransomware work, and why is it so effective?
Well, this is my own little soapbox, probably, is that I'll start with the effectiveness here. Data is the new thing. And if you can hold all of the gold, right, and someone wants to pay you market value for that data, and we have been doing that in the US, where governments, state, local, and even industry are paying for that data back. And it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Why wouldn't someone try and do it again?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Financial incentives are quite high. Yeah.
Yeah. So incentives are high. Still, the attack is encrypting servers, and data access is blocked to computer systems, right? Like that's how it works. If there's still a lot of on-prem and you're not updating your systems and backed up in a different way, we saw this with Garmin as an example.
What was that one?
Yeah, they got locked out, and Garmin actually does a lot with the FAA in aviation. They ended up having to just rebuild their servers. They didn't pay.
Okay.
But that still takes a lot of resources, right?
Right. Well, and now they're doing what they call double extortion, right? It wasn't so as companies kind of get the idea that maybe I better have good backups of my data in case this happens, or there's a natural disaster or whatever. You should always back up your data. Now they're going to the point of posting that data. It's like, okay, well, sure, you may have backups, but we've actually exfiltrated your data, and if you don't pay us, then we're going to share that data. And it could be intellectual property, it could be, embarrassing stuff. Even if you have backups, you're not safe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of paying the money, backups,
right? Yeah,
but I guess this goes back to what information are you holding, and how valuable is it to you?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, no, we are putting dollar figures on that as we speak with a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the Colonial Pipeline one. This one, I guess, has been wrapped up, sort of. I think my guess is there's going to be an investigation because it sounds like it's still a little weird. But I mean, I'm here in North Carolina. I think you're on the East Coast. So did you feel this? I know I did. A lot of our gas stations here are out of gas. Was it impacted where you were?
I personally, I live in Washington, D.C., so supposedly there was not a lot of gas because there was some hoarding of gas.
Yep.
But I don't drive that much, so it didn't impact me. I did notice that the price of gas, because I looked, went up a little bit. And in some places, there was definitely price gouging, which I think people were trying to take advantage of that.
Oh, sure.
Luckily, and that's a different conversation in terms of legality. But
right. Right.
So yes, we were impacted here, not to a crazy degree like North Carolina. Had some crazy situations that I see.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So.
Yeah, I'm the same boat. I don't drive that much either, so it didn't really impact me personally. But I know a lot of people that were like, oh, it just happened to be caught out. Like my tank was almost empty, so yeah, I don't drive much, but I do drive. And so, like my daughters, I immediately informed them, when I saw that there was going to be a run on gas, and of course this just perpetuates the run on the gas. But what are you going to do?
Right.
I knew that my one daughter was just about out of gas, and she had to drive soon. I knew so I said, you better go get some gas now or you're not going to be able to get it. And she had to go to 4 different stations before she found one. And then even that one had really long lines. But she was able to finally top up. The other one didn't. She tried a few stations and gave up, but she didn't have to drive. So she was able to move on. But anyway, so I've heard some conflicting stories about this particular case. And I was wondering if you had any more insights. for instance, I heard that a lot of people think, well, they hacked our pipelines. Well, my understanding is no, they didn't. What they hacked was the billing system. And so, and I get it, the company shut down because it couldn't get paid for its gas. I understand that they need to get paid. That's a business. I understand that. But my understanding was it was not the actual, the computers running the pipeline. It was the billing system. The other thing I heard is that they paid the ransom, the $5 million ransom. What do you know about this case? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess we're all hearing sort of conflicting information. It hit the billing system, but then they shut down the pipeline due to just basically like a preemptive of what so they shut everything down to allow the ability for the hackers not to gain more information.
Okay. Yeah, so
Right.
they thought it might spread through the network from billing to the systems that actually control the pipeline. Is that what you mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so if you shut down the entire network, then you have to do things manually. So then they moved down to the manual path as far as from what I know.
Okay.
So then they took this manual path of moving gas and then they could get the systems back online.
They did apparently pay the ransom, is it? And I'd heard it was $5
I
million.
heard that they did not.
Really? Yeah, so that conflicting stories, exactly. So,
Yeah.
when did you hear that? Was that recent? Because last I heard they I don't know what the source was. Last I heard that said they paid $5 million. But then you're right. I've heard other stories that say they didn't, so I'm really confused.
Yes, I heard through, I think it's Bloomberg, their sources said that they did not pay it.
Huh. Okay. So this leads to yet another related topic, and I've actually talked to some folks on the show about this before, and that is all these cybersecurity incidents have led to, of course, because we're in a capitalist society, they've led to cyber insurance. Companies who are out there that want to insure you against these things, ransomware, for example. Part of what they do is they help you recover from an attack, like a home insurance. If you have a tornado or flood or whatever, they come in after the damage is done and help you, remediate that as best as possible. And in some cases, and I know this is usually their last line of defense, they will actually help you with paying the ransom. That's part of what insurance covers is paying the ransom. I've heard from people I've interviewed on the show that some of the recovery companies that they hire, because, that's not an in-house thing. Usually they hire some other outside company to help do the forensics or the rebuilding of the computers. But a lot of these recovery companies I've heard actually behind the scenes turn around and just pay the ransom. And then they turn around and charge you with a little bit of profit on top. If you're the kind of person who doesn't want to pay the ransom on principle, so I'm going to pay a company to recover from that instead. Well, if they just turn around and pay the ransom, then it's still happening anyway. Anyway, surely you've heard of this. What is your personal take on the whole cyber insurance industry? Is it a good thing? Is it something that people should investigate and it's a legitimate thing, or is it just people looking to make money off of the misery of others?
I'm not a super big fan of the cyber insurance. I mean, it still doesn't protect your data and getting it back or doing any sort of controls to hold on to the data. I know that some insurance companies that have been issuing policies have now said that they're going to stop offering policies to reimburse for ransomware hacks.
Because it's just too expensive, like that, or why? Like, why are they stopping doing it?
Well, I mean, let's think what the option is with cyber insurance or any insurance, right? If it's not profitable for them to think about the long haul, and there's been so many data breaches that they're just going to continue to pay out. Maybe they do it once, but then they're going to be like, "Oh, we're not doing it again." So you're just kind of wasting your money. You're losing your data, and the longevity of it is not going to work. So if you keep losing your data and they keep paying it out, at what point does the insurance company say, we're just not going to do this and we're not going to issue you a policy?
That is the thing about insurance. It's like casinos. The house always wins. And if for some reason the house can't win, then they're not going to be in the business of being a casino.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, one of the other things that's been coming up lately as these attacks have happened and is this notion of, not negotiating with terrorists. And the thought of paying the ransom just encourages more ransomware, to the point where one of the proposals that has been floated, at least in the U.S. government, is to actually outlaw the paying of these ransoms and even fining. I've heard that, like, if you pay the ransom, they will fine you for paying the ransom. The idea being is that if you make it illegal for companies to pay and they can't pay or don't pay, the ransomware gangs have no money to make, and then it just goes away. But there's obviously problems with that. What do you think that's a viable solution? Should we be considering that as an option or not?
I mean, everything sounds great in the abstract terms, right?
Right.
I think there's bigger plays from this, as there always are when we involve the government in different issues.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about, again, the analogy of the war on drugs, right?
Mm.
What is being used to leverage to have an upper hand? And I think with cyber attacks, information security, critical infrastructure, there are certain actors that we're learning from. There are certain things that are occurring. How do we, as a government, I'm sure they're going to think about how do we leverage some of these techniques to gain an upper hand. This sounds like a conspiracy theory right now, but we like to say it when it's not our data.
Right.
That's being stolen. Like, oh, don't negotiate with terrorists. But depending on how much data you have and you want to get it back and how much secrecy that you need, you don't want to outlaw it because money talks. And where we like to gain that data back through the use of something like money, as long as we're able to sort of trace it back to whoever's causing the issue.
Yeah, certainly I think it's going to be fraught with issues. I mean, it'd be like telling parents of kids that were kidnapped, oh, nope, can't pay. It's just not an option, right? You got to get the kids back. And in some cases, that data is all you got. I mean, and you've got to get it back for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think the only lag in that analogy would be once they give the information back, how do you know that they don't have it anymore?
True. Yeah, right? For sure.
When a kid comes back, you're like, yep, I have the kid. Like, it's not duplicated.
Very, very true. Very true. All right, so let's maybe talk about some more positive things. And since we've been getting really negative here, let's figure out what we're doing about this. And one of the things the U.S. government has done on multiple occasions, apparently, is try to come up with some basic guidelines for cybersecurity standards. And it sounds like a great idea. It's the kind of thing the government would do. But just in looking into this briefly, there have been several different U.S. agencies that have tried this, and several different proposals. Some of them, I think, multiple ones from each, about how to do this over the past 2 decades. So we can't seem to settle on whatever these things are, or maybe they're just evolving. I don't know. But the latest one I found was the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. And this replaced, maybe didn't replace, maybe it's in addition to the NIST guidelines that came before that and some others. So, on paper, obviously these things all seem like helpful things, but we've had so many to choose from. Have they actually had a positive impact on our overall cyber defenses?
I think it's had an impact. It's just that it hasn't had an impact as much as we would like. And I think there's a lot of stepping on toes.
Between government agencies, you mean?
Between government agencies.
Okay.
Right. Simultaneously, I think there's not a lot of overlap, as much overlap as you would want. So sometimes you have to meet one certification, but there's no reciprocity, and it's hard to have reciprocity with another authority. And so it starts to pile up. And yes, the goal of the cybersecurity maturity model would be to unify a lot of these standards for implementation of cybersecurity. Okay. I mean, it's all ambitious. I mean, NIST has been doing a lot, right? Like that's also the barrier. Is NIST is saying, well, we've been here and we're working on this. Why are you adding something else when we've already been here? So is that just more money that you have to spend or trying to work through? So that there's definitely conflict. And is this good or is this not what we want to do? But I think the majority would say, hey, we're taking some steps to unify, but yes, it's not perfect. Is that a positive thing or no?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it remains to be seen. Hopefully, it will be. But yeah, when I look back and I saw the long litany of various things that have come out, I'm like, man, like we've had so many chances. There's so many bites at this apple. Why are we still where we're at? But yeah, I don't know. In the last year, literally within the last 12 months, the government has done two things, though, I think that might have a better approach. And certainly anybody who believes in free market economics probably prefers this over straight up regulations. And that is they've used the government's buying power to try to influence what companies do, non-governmental companies. And for example, there was an IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020 that basically said if the government's going to buy from you, then these IoT devices, these Internet of Things devices, must meet minimum security standards. And so while it's not them saying you shall do this or you'll be fined, it's well you can do whatever you want. But if you want to sell to the government and we got a lot of money to spend, then you need to up your game. And similarly, I think some things like that were contained in the executive order from the Biden administration that I think you alluded to earlier on improving the nation's cybersecurity. So, talk to us a little bit about that. What do you think about that approach? Kind of using the purchasing power of the government to influence how private companies might improve their products and how that might affect the rest of us, not just the government.
Yeah, and this is probably where I love spending the most of my time is if we look back at some Nobel Prize winners in economics, they've basically said that if there's the right amount of force of the regulation, then you can help boost the economy. You can help with innovation.
Hmm.
And the challenge, I think, becomes is a lot of the legacy systems or these really old players within the field, they don't like a ton of change because then it reduces the amount of market share that they have. Right. I think that innovation helps. And one thing that in this executive order, they talk about, I think it's Section 3, the modernization of federal government cybersecurity is basically building in even multi-factor authentication requirements. Like they didn't even have those, right, across all federal government. So you need to develop those best practices. And that's just one aspect of how do we modernize this whole system. And if we can do that, I think that's going to be a lot better. That's helpful. You had mentioned different laws. I mean, we can go back to 1984, certain laws being put into place. Even more recently, say 2011 was the whole Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, or how everybody calls it's called FedRAMP.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so it was designed to accelerate the adoption of security cloud solutions and improve the confidence of security cloud solutions within the federal government. But we haven't even gotten there to migrate to the cloud environment. Right. So that's 2011. We're 10 years later.
Right.
So how do I think the excitement of the executive order is that we're thinking more about it and putting some of these timelines on there. But you still have continued use, like here's the but, right? That Department of Defense, for example, a lot of their employees are still continuing to use Internet Explorer as the primary browser.
Jeez.
So the reason why Microsoft got rid of the Internet Explorer more than anything was it was a broken system. Too many vulnerabilities, couldn't even fix it. We're shutting it down.
Yeah.
Right. You might as well start something from scratch because the issues are there. So people are still using these legacy systems. And now this executive order is like, all right, we really have to change things because we just had 17 states get hacked from vulnerabilities. Essentially, right? It's like the indirect ramifications of being hacked at a pipeline is it affects so many other business options. I had talked about this earlier in terms of compliance and non-compliance. Yeah, you might be able to drive your car, but if you're not keeping up on your brake pads, then when you go to try and brake and you don't have it, you're going to cause more than just the car won't stop. You're going to run into other things. It's going to stop business functions. You're probably going to have to go to court, and who knows what else it's going to do for the trust of your business.
Yeah, reputation.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then are you going to be able to drive that car? No, you're not going to be able to drive the car. So the business might just implode right there, if you're not thinking about things. So I think the government is trying to say, like, look, if we don't get this in order and start developing and modernizing these systems and best practices, the zero trust architecture,
Right.
and increase encryption protocols, multi-factor authentication, moving stuff to a cloud environment that is secure, then we're not going to be able to keep up.
So you mentioned zero trust there, and that is a term that is a buzzword that's getting thrown around a lot lately. Can you explain to the audience what we mean when we talk about zero trust?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try. I mean,
What's the gist?
the gist is you can't just, and especially in government, that you don't just trust someone for the sake of they've had access at one point, or they've had information at another time, a point in time, right? It's, we have always worked in government off trust, but we need to verify.
Mm.
And until you can verify, then you shouldn't let anyone access the system. If you have any sort of doubt, then you should definitely make that verification before you move into that. Hey, here's information. Here's what you have access to. There definitely needs to be verification along the way.
Yeah, my sense, the analogy that I like to associate with this one is like the M&M analogy, where it's crunchy on the outside and soft and chewy on the inside, where a lot of companies and organizations like to think they have borders, and so at the edge of the network is where all the defenses are at. And then once you get in, everything's easy peasy and you can get to whatever you want. My take on where the zero trust stuff is going, at least in terms of like network and security, is don't trust anything. Just because you're talking to another system within our corporate network doesn't mean you can trust that system. Because people are bringing their own devices down to work, right? They're bringing their own iPhones into the office, or their own laptops sometimes, and putting them on the network. Well, what if that device is compromised? And so we have to just kind of assume that any device of the network could be compromised and act accordingly. So you, in particular, work on artificial intelligence stuff, another buzzword that's been thrown around a lot in recent years. But you are using AI to improve cybersecurity. So tell us how that works, and then my follow-up question is what happens when the bad guys start using AI too?
I've always been looking at it at regulations and standards, and how do we keep up with them? So many regulations keep coming out, and so this goes beyond cybersecurity, just overall general regulations and standards that are put out there, or policies, as well as risks. Can we use this to identify what authorities are thinking about and what they're using, and amplify the process? Because, for example, you have 92 new regulations that are affecting your business, and they have a number that, like, the pages of these regulations just keep going and going and going. And if every year a new regulation is coming out, every year a new law is coming out that's going to affect your business, how do you keep up with all of them? And if you can, by using humans, you're paying a lot of money, and it becomes less effective, and it becomes less efficient, because you need to keep up with these standards that, or best practices that are being put out, while at the same time keeping up with the regulations. So what do you do first? Do you work on the regulation, or do you work on the standard? And if you already sort of go down this line of putting the artificial intelligence, or in this case, I'll use the actual wording, like natural language processing, to understand the context and how it relates to your business, And if you follow those regulations, you can then be able to work on the business that generates you more money.
Sure. Yeah.
This goes back to the cybersecurity piece of it not being modernized, not being streamlined. You have all these different standards. And, some people say, well, where are the gaps within these standards? Where are the gaps of these frameworks that you're building? And if you need to meet all these certifications, then can you use artificial intelligence to make it more efficient and make it more effective? And that's essentially what I'm trying to do, and I'm excited about. And our, the organization that I work for right now, 6 Clicks, we're trying to make it easy, hence the 6 clicks or less, to get you in a position to have a good cyber awareness as well as being compliant to the authority or the standard that you want to align yourself with.
What's to prevent the bad guys from turning around and using these same tools against us?
I mean, there's no prevention on that. I think people are going to try and use the same tools. You can create a law that says that you can't shoot someone, right? But if someone doesn't like that law, it doesn't stop them from using a gun, right? I wouldn't put up the law in a piece of paper in front of me and say, hey, you can't do that.
Right.
And because it's not going to stop the bullet. But in terms of putting in the appropriate controls and continuing to educate yourself and get up to speed on some of these attacks and educating your team, you are helping create and mitigate some of these issues. And the only way you can do that is to keep verifying, as you would put it, what's the soft, squishy stuff in the middle of the M&M? How do we verify that everything in here is what is supposed to be in this M&M? And they have access to that is cohesive and not breaking through the shell to leave out vulnerabilities.
Gotcha. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, let's maybe get some advice from you. In your mind, what are key steps that people should be taking right now to avoid being a hacking victim? What do you tell people, like when your neighbors or your family or whatever come to you said, Josh, give me some tips. I feel vulnerable. What should I be doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think starting to educate yourself is super helpful on these different attacks and issues. I think also, going to your manager and so in a workplace environment and say, hey, what are the controls in place? That is super helpful too. Is basically, I like calling it like sort of managing up and saying, hey, these things have happened. We have all these stories of hacks. What are we doing to protect ourselves?
Right.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is to ask the question to the person that's in charge in your organization. The other is, can we put in that encryption process? Do you have a multi-factor authentication on a personal level that lets you know like someone's accessing your email or not, right? I think that was probably the first thing that I ever did was put in some of these MFA programs and just continue to educate myself along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, education, absolutely. And of course, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make sure that people are aware of these things. And because, yeah, absolutely. Awareness and education are step one in just about any problem you want to solve. All right, final question. Can we win this war? I mean, is it possible to reach some sort of, I don't know, like a herd immunity against these broad spectrum cyber attacks? Because so many of these attacks are just kind of, spray and pray, right? It's the phishing attacks. It's these opportunistic hackers that are looking for these weaknesses that are everywhere, and people who haven't updated their software. Are we going to win this cat and mouse game, or is it just going to be a pendulum that swings back and forth?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a pendulum. I mean, but if you're in the risk game, then you're always looking and saying, oh, here's a new risk. How do we mitigate that? We got to patch that. then we got to educate, right? And I think that's always been the hard part for the good guys, is you have so many regulations and rules that you need to follow, and it could be bureaucratically, but then you're also trying to keep up with everything else.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to split your time, and this goes back to the artificial intelligence. Maybe we can get, and this is the optimistic part, is if we can become more effective and more efficient through automation tools, then if we have more players working on the automation and the tools, then it won't be a pendulum. It'll be we've educated people, we've put in the right processes, we've developed the right technology, and we're going to win. But it's that adaptation. It seems as if right now the good guys are adapting a lot less than the bad guys.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's why we're out there, both of us, I think, in our own ways, making sure that people are aware of these things. And I firmly believe that there's a lot of basic low-hanging fruit kind of things that we could all be doing. And if we get those things done, then it'll make it that much harder for the bad guys to attack us.
Yeah. And okay. So one last thing on that, in terms of telling people like what advice to give, is that this is a thought for me is all about compound interest. And if you can continue to build your skills and slowly work on different things and educate yourself, and then put in those controls and keep spreading that message, the more and more you do that, the more and more you're going to understand these risks and issues and start mitigating those, you're going to have a better posture. So if you're doing 5 push-ups a day and you're developing that muscle, then soon you'll be able to do 10 push-ups a day. And then, it just keeps going and going and going. So that building of education and awareness, and if you keep doing it, it builds more on that compound interest.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, that's like building in habits. You just got to work on it and make these things habits. Make the things you don't think about, like, when you leave your house, you don't think about locking the front door. You just do it all the time now. We didn't always do that, but that's where we're at now. And once we kind of develop those basic habits, I think we'll all be better off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show. That was very interesting to talk to you, and thanks for your advice.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Josh for coming on the show. Great talking to him. I got some great bonus content from him as well. Some really interesting, kind of touching stories from him about how he got into cybersecurity and things that he likes to do on the side. So anyway, those will be going out to patrons soon. And again, if you want that challenge going, you got to get on it. Promotion's going to end in 3 days. So next week, I'll be back with another news show. And I think I am going to get in a schedule now. I think I'm just going to do news, then interview, just go back and forth, and probably stop splitting the interviews up unless for some reason I happen to get another really, really long one or something. But I'm going to try to keep the shows as close to an hour as I can, especially on some of those news days. That's probably going to go a little bit over. But I'm going to try to keep everything about an hour each week and try to get into a little better rhythm, toggling back and forth between news shows and interview shows. And that'll line up well with the blogs and the newsletters as well. So after that, I've got another interview, and then I'll be going to DEF CON. I'm going to do some really fun reporting from DEF CON. And if, fingers crossed, if all goes well, I might have a killer interview from DEF CON. But I don't want to promise anything I can't keep, so we'll see what happens there. But stay tuned. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you don't miss anything. If there's been any reviews of the podcast or the book that were posted in the last week, again, I recorded this a week ago, so I will check those again and report on those when I get back in next week's show. But if you post something on iTunes, the iTunes page for this, or if you post something on Amazon, the book review, I will read them here. Also, I have some more nights to proclaim to the realm. Stay tuned for those. Those will be coming up soon and spread out over the next few weeks. And I'm cooking up all sorts of fun stuff for the future. Thanks again for listening. Thanks especially to those out there who are patrons. It really means a lot to me that you're supporting what I'm doing here. You can also help just by spreading the word. Turn other people onto the podcast. Turn them onto the book. Give away the book as a gift. Forward people some of the newsletters that you think they might find interesting or helpful. Follow me on social media. Repost some stuff from social media. All that helps. Every little bit. Okay, everybody, take care out there. Stay safe. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.